ITIL incident management. Have you ever heard the phrase, don't sweat the small stuff? I think it was actually a series of books that was put out a couple of years ago, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. Well, the title of this nugget should be, go ahead and sweat the small stuff, especially if it's an indication of a greater underlying problem. Not a very catchy title, I know, but that's what incident management is. So if you're ready, let's take a look at this next topic in the ITIL series. In this nugget on incident management, we're going to look at 5 key knowledge areas. First of all, we'll get an overview of incident management and some key definitions of terminology. Then we'll look at the incident life cycle, incident escalation, and then we'll talk about functional versus hierarchical escalation, or horizontal versus vertical escalation. And then finally, the benefits, costs, and challenges of incident management. You know, it always helps to have some definitions right off the bat, and there's no better place to go to define something than the ITIL Glossary version 3. Now, I recommended to you earlier that you go ahead and you get this document, and you might want to use this document throughout this nugget series to kind of cross-reference terminology as we go. A lot of the exam is going to be simply testing your knowledge of basic fundamental terminology. For example, what is an incident? Well, an incident is an unplanned interruption to an IT service or the reduction in the quality of an IT service. An incident is also the failure of some configuration item that has not yet impacted your IT service. For instance, the failure of one hard disk from a mirrored set. Now, incident management is the process that's responsible for managing the life cycle of all of your incidents. The main goal of incident management is to return the IT service to users as quickly as possible with as little impact on the organization as possible. So again, don't forget about this ITIL Glossary version 3. So we've determined that the goal of incident management is to lower or even eliminate effects or occurrences of IT interruptions or disturbances or reduction in service quality. And our goal here also is to get our users back to work ASAP, as soon as humanly possible. This means your incident manager and his team needs to hire the appropriate specialists, the appropriate people with IT expertise to record, classify, and allocate or route to escalated tiers all of the incidents that occur. All along the way, the progress of incident management needs to be monitored. All the incidents must be resolved, and once they're resolved, the process should be officially closed with accompanying documentation. This next diagram kind of gives you a sample of incident management, and I've done this in kind of a vertical process from the bottom up, but this can be a horizontal or a vertical process, and we can see this is a vertical process here, and we'll talk about the differences as it relates to escalation of incidents here in a moment. But again, at the bottom we have, of course, our customers, our users, our power users, our corporate application management. And then from there, it's going to move in the incident management process to the first line or the first tier. Again, this can be vertical or horizontal, and that's our service desk, which we've discussed in detail earlier in this CBT nugget. Then the next tier or the second line is our network management, our server management, or the central processing. That's who the service desk is going to go to as they escalate incidents. Then the third line, which is kind of the highest level of technical specialists, are the developers and the architects. These are the ones that have developed or programmed our systems. And it only makes sense that, finally you're going to get back into the laboratory where Dr. Frankenstein and Igor are in there doing their thing. Now, once you move beyond tier 3, we have what's called the N tier, and this means bringing in vendors, third-party vendors, third-party suppliers, and third-party consultants that go beyond the expertise of our in-house organization. So we're going kind of outsourcing to the nth line, and that would be kind of the final layer of handling our incidences. Now let's go down to this bottom tier here where our customers and our users are. Remember that in the context of incident management, an incident, and I'm putting quotes around that, you can't see me, but my fingers are putting little quotes around it. Incidents are going to include not only software errors, but also hardware errors and just your fundamental daily service requests that are all going to be handled in the incident life cycle. And these can be service requests, standard services with our customers that are going to be covered under service level agreements. And all of these things are going to be stored in an incident management database. Now, the software errors and hardware errors, that's one thing to understand, but what's a service request? Well, these are things like just basic questions about the status of a system, resetting a password, troubleshooting security credentials, a basic request for information, technical information, a functional question. Maybe you've got a power user who wants to extract information from a database, but they don't have the right role or privileges. Maybe it's a request for a batch job or restoring a database or questions about bringing certain types of hardware into the organization. Maybe it's information for a new employee and their settings for IT functionality and IT services. These are what we call service requests. So now that we've determined the scope of what an incident is, again, going beyond just a hardware or software error, but an actual occurrence that generates a change in the organization, what are the objectives and the benefits of incident management? Well, let's just go around the circle here. First of all, by managing incidents, we're going to reduce the impact on business by solving the issue as quickly as possible. We're going to improve user productivity by getting that user back to work quickly by following through on the incident. We also want to have an objective of obtaining independent, customer-focused incident monitoring. It'll also make our service level agreement information more readily available. Again, remember, a service request from a vendor or a customer about an SLA is an incident itself. We're going to lower the cost of doing business. Incidents piling up, and as we'll find out, an incident can be an indicator of an underlying problem. These can quickly add costs to doing business. One objective is to react quickly and efficiently to all incidences. We want to have active monitoring of user domains and the services that those users and customers are using. We also want to keep problems from escalating. Now that's a funny term to use because from time to time we will have to escalate the problem either vertically or horizontally to other tiers. But from escalating, I'm using the term here as it relates to becoming a bigger problem. By handling incidences quickly and efficiently, we can improve our user and customer satisfaction and overall goodwill to our company. We want to get more accurate operations. And one of the goals in handling an incident is to prevent the scenario of too many cooks in the kitchen. For example, training that first tier of customer support and service desk to handle as many basic fundamental incidences as possible without having to bring in other quote-unquote cooks from higher levels, higher tiers, or higher technical areas. They need to be focused on other more important infrastructure issues in IT. Let me give you a real-world example of what I consider to be a circumstance of bad incident management. It was in my State Farm contract, and again, what we're doing here is we're upgrading servers in all the State Farm agencies in my particular region to Windows Server 2003. Now, what happened in about a 10-day window of this rollout, all of the upgrades and installations got canceled or pushed forward for a couple of weeks because all of the personnel from the service desk had to be pulled off this incident handling for the project into a more critical State Farm infrastructure issue. So not having enough cooks to handle the infrastructure problem forced this rollout project to be postponed because they had to pull people out of the service desk to deal with this issue. So by assigning too many qualified cooks to the first tier service desk, they didn't have enough back in the development and architecture area and IT operations area to deal with the infrastructure crisis. Next, we want to look at an important differentiation in the area of incident management, and that is incident records versus problem records. And before we even discuss the record aspect, because recording and monitoring is a huge part of incident management, we want to define the difference between incidences and problems, okay? Well, we've already defined incidences, but a problem, this is a very important factor, a problem is the unknown underlying cause of one or more incidences. So think about it. Problems cause incidences, okay? Incidences or incidents do not become problems. Very important to realize. For example, I mentioned earlier that one disk in a mirrored disk configuration fails. Okay? If a disk fails, that is an incident, but the problem is the underlying cause of the incident. For example, is it a misconfiguration of the fault-tolerant solution? Is it a problem with the hardware or software aspect of the disk mirroring? So the problem is the underlying cause, typically unknown. So another example here, okay? An incident, let's say your workstation won't start up. So you get a call from a user to the service desk, workstation won't start up. What's the problem? Well, perhaps you need to replace the power supply. Let's say this is going on in multiple workstations in a large organization in a 2-week period. Well, when you rolled out your new systems, maybe you had a bunch of bad power supplies. So the whole problem management aspect is a whole different IT service altogether. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk in an upcoming Nugget movie about problem management specifically. Or let's say a user or a customer can't reach a network printer. That's an incident. Okay, a problem might be, let's say, a rogue DHCP server that's in your organization leasing out bad IP addresses. So when we talk about the records, okay, incident records are going to be end user focused, okay, end user or customer focused. The reporting management of incidences is going to focus on measurements, measuring user downtime, measuring power user downtime, and the impact on our business or our organization. A problem record, on the other hand, is going to start with an IT management decision to invest IT resources. For example, taking personnel off of the service desk and putting them on an infrastructure crisis, or investing in new power supplies, or new software solutions that identify rogue DHCP servers, wireless or wired. Maybe a new fault-tolerant solution, okay? These are the problem records, okay? They are management decisions to make investments of resources and the aspect of end-user downtime for root cause investigation. What is the root cause of the incidences, okay? And the implementation of a resolution. A problem record is going to focus on an IT internal process, where an incident record is going to focus on an end user. Management reporting on problems is going to focus on root causes and implementing structural or infrastructure resolutions. Hopefully those differentiations make sense to you, and we'll look at problems here in an upcoming Nugget movie. As an incident manager, when you're putting together your service desk solution and incident handling, this is a typical incident life cycle that you're going to work from. The first process, the first step in the process is to detect and record. This is the original acceptance of an incident to the service desk, to the first tier. Okay, the incident's detected somehow either through automated software procedures or through a call to the service desk. And at that point, an incident record is going to be created, and of course that's going to go right into a database, maybe an Oracle or a Microsoft SQL Server database. Then in the second step, we're going to go through a process of classifying and supporting. Now, the classification can occur using a script. The service desk can ask certain questions, and based on the answers to those questions, the service desk personnel or an application can classify the incident. For example, is it a software issue, is it a hardware issue, or is it a service request? So it's coded by the type of incident, its status, its impact on the organization, okay? Is it urgent? Is it critical? What's its priority? How does it relate to a service level agreement? You know, think of the concept of a person coming into an emergency room or a triage. You kind of categorize them into one of three categories by priority. Do they have a life-threatening illness or a life-threatening condition or injury? They get moved to the top of the line. Is it a serious injury but not one that's life-threatening that if they don't get immediate care, they're going to expire? Well, they get moved down in the priority list. Or perhaps it's just something like a minor cut that needs stitches that can be handled an hour from now, or you can move them on or pass them on to some other department. So you kind of have that approach. You know, what's the impact on your organization? What's the urgency? You're going to kind of build a system that estimates the usage of resources, people, resources, time, and that can be put them into a low, medium, or high priority. And part of this also goes into, as far as impact, how much time does it take to handle the incident? You know, critical, it needs to be taken care of in less than an hour. A high priority needs to be taken care of in less than 8 hours. Medium priority or low priority, less than 24 or 48 hours. Again, these are guidelines that you can use to put your incident system into place. At that point, the user may be given suggestions from the service desk, either based on a script or based on expertise, to solve the incident or work around the issue, even if it's just a temporary solution. Now, if it's a service request, talked about these things earlier, if it's a service request, then at this point, we're going to go off kind of into a different process, as a service request doesn't involve investigating and diagnosing or troubleshooting a problem. A service request, here I'll just put SR, is going to go through a different process. The service request procedure that's put in place by the organization. For example, recover a password, let's say. Investigation and diagnosis, if there's no known solution at that particular first tier, then the incident's going to be investigated, either further by that group or it could go through an escalation process. Once you find a solution, the issue can then be resolved and the system can be recovered. And again, this step must take place. There must be some type of resolution to the incident. Even if the resolution to the incident is to move this over into the problem and change management area of IT services to implement some type of infrastructure change where resources have to be allocated and systems have to be replaced or updated. Okay, so there has to be some type of resolution here. Once that's put in place, then we've got closure. Everybody wants closure, okay? In a relationship, in life, and of course in incident life cycles. The users ask if they're satisfied with the solution, and then you close the incident. There may be some follow-up, maybe through a survey or a questionnaire to help improve this process. Now realize all along the way, and I don't really have this written down here, but all along the way there should be kind of an offshoot from each one of these steps of the life cycle. And this offshoot should be an ongoing tracking process and progress monitoring. Okay, so along every step of the way, you're going to have either some real-time live monitoring and tracking of the process. For example, when you make a phone call to a service desk and you hear, this call may be monitored for quality assurance, okay? You have that type of thing, or maybe you have a software solution in place. So tracking and progress monitoring is working in parallel all along the way. Now, I've already alluded to incident escalation, and I've mentioned that there is a horizontal escalation and a vertical escalation. Let me just kind of give you, before we define those two things, let me kind of give you just a basic flow chart of what could happen in your organization when you're escalating incidents. So what we have here is, first of all, we have our Tier 1. our first line support. And I'll just draw a line here. So we know our first step is to detect and record the incident. Now, that's going to come in the form of some type of request. That could be a request from a user, from a customer, from a system. It could be an application. It could be another service desk agent. It could be someone in another IT department. Now, if it's a service request, let's say it's a new employee who needs their account set up and information on how to use their new laptop, well, that would be a service request. So that's going to be an offshoot here to what we call a service request procedure. So I'll just put an SR here for service request. If it's a hardware or software issue, it's going to go to the initial level of support here in T1. And I'll just jot in here support. And that's our service desk staff. Now let's say the next question is, was that staff member, was that personnel able to resolve it? If the answer is yes, then we'll basically say we're going to go to the next step, which is resolution recovery. REC, recovery, and then of course we'll go ahead and close the incident and document. Now, what if we were not able to resolve the issue here at Tier 1? That's where escalation comes in. And escalation means we're going to go to Tier 2 or to second line support. And as I'll explain in a second here, this escalation could be a horizontal escalation or a vertical escalation. So once we go to this Tier 2, it's the Tier 2 personnel that are involved in investigating, and diagnosing the problem or the incident. Now, if this is resolved, we'll just put RES. If this is resolved, then we go back over here to that resolution and recovery process and closure. If it's not, we'll just put no, and this should be no here. If it's not resolved, then we're going to go to our third line support. What we have here at Tier 3 is more investigation and diagnosis. Now, depending upon your organization, Tier 3 or the third line may be system architects, system developers, software developers, programmers, those types of things. Remember, our second tier or our second line individuals, this is network management, server management, central processing, or a higher level of expertise of service desk personnel. Again, this is a framework, not a hard and fast rule. So again, if the problem gets resolved here, and I'm going into red ink because this is a more serious issue, obviously. If it's resolved, we go back to resolution and recovery and closure. But if not, then we're going to move to what we would say would be the N tier, nth line support. And this means vendors, who actually manufactured the product that we're using or the actual software, or bring in some consultants, third-party consultants, systems consultants, engineers, security personnel, whatever. That's the nth tier, the nth line support. And don't forget, we're working here with other IT services all along the way. And we're going to talk about these. We'll be dealing with problem management. We'll be dealing with change management, which may be separate IT services with separate managers and separate teams. Maybe you've got availability management that deals with failover solutions, backups and restores and redundancy, RAID hardware and software systems. Maybe you've got a capacity management, Capacity management. Maybe you've got a service level agreement management. Again, it all depends upon the size of your organization and the way it's structured. Well, as you can well deduce, incident escalation is the process of passing the issue on to an individual or a system with either a higher expertise or a higher authority level. Remember, this may not be simply, taking a technical issue that a personnel cannot handle and giving it on to somebody with more expertise. It may also be an area that is beyond the scope of their security or their role. So somebody with a higher authority has to handle the problem. Also, an incident may not be able to be resolved by the first line support within the service level agreement time frame. Therefore, it has to get passed on or escalated. Now there's two types of escalation. There's functional or horizontal escalation, and then there's hierarchical or vertical escalation. Functional escalation is the horizontal process of bringing in co-workers, okay? Bringing in personnel, in-sourced in-house personnel with special skill sets or additional access privileges or just simply more time to deal with the incident. This may go beyond the boundaries of the service desk into other departments or into other business units. So it's a horizontal escalation. The hierarchical, the one that seems the one that we've been looking at so far, more likely is the vertical escalation. This is when it involves going to upper level tiers or upper level authorities. So we might think of going from tier 1 to tier 2 as a functional or horizontal escalation, but then once you move into the development of the architectural area or to the nth tier by going outside to vendors and suppliers and contractors, that may be what we consider a hierarchical or vertical escalation. Now what we want to do from a design standpoint is you want to fully develop the personnel and the systems of the functional or horizontal escalation first to make sure that you have the personnel in place, the co-workers, the special skill sets, the access privileges, the individuals that have more time to allocate first before we fully develop that hierarchical escalation by creating second, third, or N tiers. So before you get into developing the second, third, and N tier solution, you want to make sure that the first tier and second tier solution, if they are functional and horizontal, is fully developed first. Finally, let's look at some of the benefits, the costs, and the challenges of incident management, starting of course with the positive aspect, and that is the benefits. What are the benefits of proper and effective incident handling and incident management? Well, you're going to get greater effectiveness through your business, your organization, reduced business impact from problems and incidents, including service requests. By creating a proper database and monitoring and reporting on the process, assessing it all along the way, it'll allow you to put into place proactive enhancements and changes that can make your organization run more smoothly. It also provides for more business-focused service-level agreement management. By improving the monitoring and performance of incidents, you'll get better service quality. It'll also allow you to better utilize your staff and create a more efficient personnel pool. By learning from incidents and problems, it'll allow you to eliminate future incidents and service requests. It'll help you build a more accurate database with a bottom line of improving customer and user satisfaction. Of course, all of this comes at a price, okay? There's going to be initial cost in time, in monies, in personnel resources for the initial planning and implementation of incident management in your service desk. You'll also need to have a communication infrastructure in your service desk for this particular IT service. There's going to be a training process of training from the top down. Also, a training and ramp up period you need to take into consideration. This could add some downtime to your organization. Again, you don't want to advertise this incident handling and incident management solution to your customer or to your users until it's been pilot tested and put into place. There's also additional hardware and software tools for incident management, and of course that's going to be an additional cost. What are some of the challenges to doing this? Well, the challenges are the fact that your users and your staff could actually bypass the procedures put in place for incident handling. If they deem the process too cumbersome or too bureaucratic, they may bypass it altogether, trying to resolve errors themselves or directly contacting specialist staff without following procedures. This is going to cause all kinds of problems in the long run. It's going to generate an inaccurate database. It's not going to support your change management and your control and problem management procedures. And the IT organization itself is not going to get information about the number of errors, the types of errors and incidents that are occurring, and management won't get the information they need. Also, one of the challenges is just too many incidents, okay? Too many problems in the organization Poor infrastructure can lead to a backlog of incidents. If you have too few staff or a poorly designed infrastructure, this can lead to a backlog and, of course, a process overload on the service desk and the accompanying IT services, including this IT manager, whoever's in charge of incident response and incident management. Also, if your first tier is not properly trained or staffed, you may have too many escalations. Escalations that aren't resolved quickly enough, or escalations that need more specialized resources. Too many of these are going to have an adverse impact on your organization, on the specialists themselves, and on the overall infrastructure. This goes back to that example I used earlier about State Farm having to pull specialists out of their service desk, their Tier 1 service desk, because they weren't fully and properly staffed to handle the infrastructure problem they had. So there was a 10-day downtime. That's huge, especially for a company-wide deployment or upgrade, which was the case for State Farm here. Then overall challenges are just lack of clear definitions, clearly defining the services, clearly defining the service level agreements with your customers, your users, your vendors, and just an overall lack of commitment on the part of management, all the way down to that service desk employee who's dealing with the day-to-day incidents and service requests. On this fifth nugget of the ITIL Foundation series, we covered 5 key topics. First of all, an overview of incident management. We looked at incident life cycle, the incident escalation process. We talked about functional versus hierarchical escalation, and then finally, the benefits, costs, and challenges of incident management. I hope this CBT nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. We'll see you in the next movie.